Good evening, everybody. We are so honored that you've joined us and are willing to spend an evening in community about such an incredibly important and timely topic. Our forums were created starting in 2018 community, a variety of perspectives on policy issues that will impact their work as educators, leaders, and counselors. We are excited tonight that we have over 325 registrants, which is testimony to the importance of the topic. Our audience includes DePaul students, of course, faculty and staff, and then students from some of our sister universities. So welcome if you're joining us from somewhere outside DePaul. Great testament to the need for our work to be collective and to be impactful, and it needs to be collective to be impactful. It's also importantly shows the broad range of people who are dedicated to issues of mental wellness. I want to thank Diane Horowitz for her dedicated work on these forums. They would not happen without you, Diane, and to Maya Mushitz and the College of Ed who makes it all run smoothly behind the scenes. So thank you to you both. We are recording the session. You'll get a link to the recording that you can share with others who care deeply about our education and mental wellness systems. I will now hand it over to the lovely and wonderful Dr. Derek Tovar Murray. He serves as our Associate Dean for DEI and Faculty Development in the College of Ed here at DePaul. He's one of our counseling faculty and also a mental wellness leader in the community. And I have no doubt that you will be inspired and learn a great deal. So Derek, I hand it to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer Dean. Welcome to our fall forum, which is titled Meeting Students' Mental Health Challenges. I want to also thank you for being here today. Whether you are faculty, staff, student, professional in the field of counseling, education, or related fields, being here today signifies the need for us to reflect on who we are today. How do we bridge the gap in educational achievement? And also the importance of providing bold and safe spaces and environments for our students to take the risk to discuss their mental health challenges. As I reflect on some of them, I'm reminded of a manuscript written by the American School Counselor Association on their website that looked at the role of school counselors in students' mental health. And what they indicated that over the past decade, we have seen an increase of anxiety, depression, substance use, suicidal ideation, and also attempts. In the Counseling Today, an article came out that indicated that this increase of severity and the prevalence of mental health among school-age children has increased, and the challenges range from self-harm to disordered eating to underdevelopment in the social and emotional regulation skills. This is why the forum that we have in the day is more important. And while these challenges aren't new, but they become very abstract in their nature. And it becomes important for us now to have a student-centered approach where we address and openly discuss our student challenges and mental health needs. So therefore, this forum will consist of 4 parts to it. We have our main speaker, which I will introduce shortly, who will come and speak to you about some of these considerations. And then we have 2 respondents who will come and talk as well. And then all of us will come together and talk about a way to move forward. And then I would do concluding remarks about holding on to hope, especially during these times. I would like to first introduce our main speaker for today, Micere Keels, please. Micere is a professor in the Department of Comparative Human Development at the University of Chicago. Dr. Keels' research focuses on understanding how race, ethnicity, and poverty structures interact to support and challenges that students face and youth face in our society today. She is the founder of the Trauma Responsive Educational Practice Project, which is a research practice partnership that focuses on the science of trauma with realities of what goes on in the schools and classroom management. She recently published a book entitled Trauma Responsive Education Practice, Helping Students Cope and Learn. I also now want to introduce Melissa Hughes. Melissa Hughes has taught for around 25 years. She's been incorporating poetry in her work in Teen Inglewood High School, where she's the co-founder and coach of their renowned poetry team. She was named the 2010 Louder Than a Bomb Coach of the Year. She currently teaches English at Michelle Clark High School, where she led the staff through multi-year professional development on Healing Center engagement. She holds a Master of Education in Youth Development from the UIC and Curriculum and Instruction with emphasis in urban teacher leadership from Louisiana State University. Along with her students, she has been featured in The Reader, PBS News Hour. She was the recipient of the 826 Chicago Teaching Award, which is now named the Missy Hughes Teaching Award. Thank you, Melissa. I now would like to introduce you to Lisette Flores. Lisette Flores is an experienced school counselor with over 13 years of service in the field of education. Born and raised on the southeast side of Chicago, she is deeply committed to advocacy for the academic, social, emotional well-being of those students that we're here to serve, especially in urban school communities. She's currently a counselor at Grismore Elementary School. From 2017 to 2022, Ms. Flores served as co-chair of the Chicago Teachers Union in the Counselors Committee, where she helped to lead major contractual wins by using her voice and recognizing the power of advocacy. We'd like to thank you for the support that you give to our school counselors across Chicago, as well as our students. Your leadership, without a doubt, has made a difference in our world. So thank you so kindly. Now, what I would like to do, and it's my hope today, that we walk away with some lessons learned about the mental health challenges of our students, and we walk away recognizing the hope that we have as human beings. Why don't we just begin? So let's begin by bringing Micere Keels, please. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you very much I can say for myself, being invited to be here, and DePaul for hosting this forum and getting so many different voices together into this conversation. I think one of the biggest things that I'll share in parts of my presentation is that it takes all of us. All the different kinds of staff roles in a school to make things happen, but it also takes all the different faculty roles at universities to make sure that the staff and the teachers coming into schools now and going forward will have some level of capacity to support student mental health and well-being in some way, because it really is an all hands on deck issue that needs addressed. And because there's so many kids that need support, it's no longer something that can be left to one staff role. That for me is one of the biggest things, that if you take away anything, take away that it's going to take all the staff in the schools to support and meet kids' needs. So I will share my slides now. and put my timer on because there are so many things to be discussed. And I'm only going to be in 20 minutes talking about a few of them. And so I'm sure that many of you will be left with many questions unanswered. And so next forum, some of those questions will hopefully be answered. Okay. There we go. Trying to get it into slide 7. So what I titled the presentation, it's care and safety at school, because it's really what we are trying to do, both provide care, and it's care very ambiguously defined because it's many different forms of care that kids need, as well as safety. This is, at least in my lifetime, I don't know I know there have been other points in history. Within my lifetime, this, I think, is the moment when our world has felt the most unsafe. It has felt in many different ways and formats, and based on the reports of how students are doing, a place where school is no longer taken for granted as a safe space. And so, and that's physical safety, emotional safety, psychological safety. And so these are things, providing care and safety at school are things that we actively have to create. So I'm going to run through one set of core concepts about trauma. Truthfully, a whole half-hour presentation could just be on some core concepts on trauma. So again, I'm going to just touch on these things. I believe you guys will have access to the slides. So I put, good text on the slides so that they're there for you to reflect back to. The core concepts, what I'm going to talk about when it comes to just understanding a little bit more about trauma itself, is types of trauma. And I'm starting in the middle, which is acute trauma, which is a single time limited traumatic event that overwhelms one's coping. And this is largely how most of us think about trauma when we're thinking about individuals that we're supporting, individuals in our family, and so on and so forth. We think about an event that has happened that was traumatic, and we think about, okay, that event has happened. Now, how can we provide you with some support to get you back to normal, to get you back to how you were before that traumatic event? However, that is only one small aspect of trauma. And if we only think about trauma as an acute event, we're missing many of the reasons why kids need so much support, and many of the reasons why we see so much dysregulated behavior. So a whole set of things are historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. And where these come in and being really important is, why do we see so many racial differences at the group level and socioeconomic differences? And it's because at those population levels, people in the US have had different levels of exposure to trauma and support healing trauma. So when we think about historical trauma, traumatic experiences occurring to specific subpopulations that create intense wounds during their lives and are passed on to the next generations. So we're thinking of issues of slavery, and yes, it still affects and it's passed on in terms of differences in life experiences. We're thinking of differences in exposure to poverty. We're thinking of differences in exposure to right now, the aspects of how immigration and mass deportation are going to create large differences in some populations, Hispanic populations, Latin American populations experiencing that in the US, and others not, for it not being such a central issue in their lives. But this will be a historical traumatic event for those subpopulations that will then affect them in generations to come, which moves us on to intergenerational trauma. So if we experience traumatic events in our lives and then grow up and then have children and have families, if that trauma is never processed and healed and we never get that support, oftentimes that's going to show up in our parenting, that's going to show up in our households, and it's going to be passed on to the next generation in them having been exposed to a high level of stress and adverse events. And so then we get to acute trauma. But for many of us, there are historical and intergenerational traumas that are also playing out. So moving past acute trauma, we have the issue of chronic trauma, which is just that today, some people, some youth, some children are living and growing up in communities or neighborhoods where there's ongoing stress and traumatic events that overwhelm their coping. So it's not just what they experience themselves or in their family, but they are also living in a community where there are chronic traumatic events, which means that some people are going to have complex trauma where others are just recovering from a single acute traumatic event. And complex trauma is when you are experiencing high levels of toxic stress and trauma from several different sources. It can be from peers, from the community, from home. It can be as associated with poverty. It can be associated with lack of food and security and all of those things. But when there are many aspects of your life that are intensely stress-inducing and traumatic, it can just lead to this just generalized sense that the world is just not a safe place. And that creates tremendous dysregulation. And then lastly, we have system-induced trauma, which again, in my lifetime, we have never been in a more intense moment when there's system-induced trauma. And that's when systems designed to quote unquote help trauma victims compound or re-traumatize through policies, procedures, and practices. And so that thinking about, when we're thinking about schools, it is when kids are exhibiting dysregulation because of stress and trauma, are they receiving mental health support or are they receiving punitive responses? It is all of those types of things. So the system, in this case, context, thinking about schools where kids have to go, where it's supposed to be an institution that supports and facilitates healthy development, sometimes the way that system responds to the dysregulation that children show can be a system that then increases the level of trauma that kids experience. So as one set of core concepts, really just highlighting the fact that we need to think beyond acute single incident traumatic experiences to understand the complexity and the totality of what kids are experiencing. And then coupled with that is the idea that this doesn't mean that stress in and of itself is a bad thing, because positive stress is something that you guys do as educators and as we do in schools, which is that we push kids. We induce a little bit of stress because that pushes our growth, that pushes us to learn. And so when stress is positive or when stress is tolerable, so we experience an intense stressful event, but then we have time to recover. Both of these things, positive stress that we induce in kids' lives in schools, and also tolerable stress, so we're all going to experience stressful events, can help us to grow. The challenge is when we experience toxic stress. And toxic stress happens when we experience extreme, frequent, or extended activation of the body's stress response without the buffering presence of a supportive adult. So this is thinking about kids, how kids and youth can manage and grow from stress is when there is the buffering presence of a supportive adult. And so then one of the things that became really important for me to share when I was looking for what do we know about this current moment and what's happening right now, I found a really great recent report on from youth and what they are saying about whether they're getting the social support that they need. And this is a 2024 report, data collected in 2021 and 2022. And it's teenagers in the US and their reports regarding social support. So this figure shows the percent of teenagers, I think it was like 12 to 16 or something like that, or 12 to 17, percent of teenagers who say that they receive the social and emotional support that they need. And one of the things it shows is that only 27.5% are saying that, yes, they feel like they're always receiving the social support that they need. And then you have another 31% that are saying usually. And so the ones that are kind of on the good side are the 27% that are always getting that support that they need, and 31% that usually get the support that they need. But quite a high number of them say that they're only sometimes getting it, rarely getting it, and never getting it. And so this is what teens are reporting about the social support that they receive. The challenge is, what do parents think? So these were the same parents of these teens. When they were asked, do they think that their teen is getting the social support that they need? And you'll see here that 77% of parents think that their teenagers are getting the social support that they need. And we find this often, this disconnect and large gap between what youth say they want and need and are getting, and what adults think they want and need and are getting. And so this means that in this context, parents are really overestimating whether their teenagers are in distress and not getting the support that they need for that. And then the other piece that I just want to show, that in that there are also some subgroups that need a little bit more care and attention when we are thinking about who in our schools might be the one most in need of getting social support and emotional support from the staff at the school. So this is boys and girls, and as a kind of not surprising, only 52% of girls saying that they are always or usually receiving the social support. So girls reporting that they need more than they're getting. And when we look at some racial and ethnic group differences, we see that Black and Hispanic youth are reporting less, that they're getting less of the social support that they need. So fewer of them are always or usually receiving the social support, social and emotional support that they need. And then also teenagers that are sexual or gender minority are less likely to report that they are getting the social support that they need. So just this real idea that we need to start asking our youth more about whether or not they're getting what they need in order to be socially and emotionally, so in order to be psychologically healthy. So given that there are also, this could be, we have talked about this in many different ways. There are reports of the number of kids that are qualifying for being at tier 2 and tier 3 for mental health supports. Those numbers keep going up and up. No matter how you talk about it or how you think about the numbers, essentially the bottom line is that there needs to be a whole school framework, all hands on deck, when we're thinking about meeting the number of kids that are going to need support. And so one of the ways to talk about this is what are some, and these are only some examples that I'm providing here of the many different staff roles that can meet the need. And so, not coming up. So there needs to be coordination through behavior and mental health teams. Doesn't have to be a new team. Principals and/or administrators are needed to create and implement school-wide policies, practices that develop schedules that enable staff to access structural trauma responsive support around their teaching and self-care practices. So principals and administrators need to make it a priority and make time for staff to integrate this into their work. Teachers can implement trauma-informed classroom strategies to support neurobiological regulation, which can significantly reduce student dysregulation. So there are ways that we can structure the classroom in order to reduce the level of stimulation and activation and dysregulation. Social workers and counselors can develop universal screening plans to proactively identify trauma symptoms and triggers in students, as well as providing tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. I also often say that social work and counselors can push into classrooms and help the teacher develop better strategies. Because if you're helping the teacher develop better strategies, then they're able to support their whole classroom better. School nurses can be trained and empowered to focus on more than the physical health of students. And school nurses report that they are increasingly called in to support mental health support, to provide mental health support. And then also when you think about the security staff in the school, they can be trained in de-escalation strategies that are responsive to the needs of students coping with trauma. They can become better able to recognize when this is a distress response rather than a safety problem, and respond in ways that don't re-traumatize and trigger more dysregulation. So again, there are many ways of talking about these things, but the bottom line is that it's an all staff effort, and there are many ways that each role can help. So I'm going to end in the last 3 or 4 minutes that I have in thinking about a particular group of kids at this time and what their needs are, and broadly calling them children in newcomer families. These are kids in migrant, immigrant, refugee families. So kids who, for whom the US is a new home. Even if they were born in the US, it might be that for their family, the US is a new home. So they're still in a newcomer family. And making the point that, so for those of you who are newer to social and emotional learning, so social emotional learning strengthens students' non-cognitive capacities by giving them the skills to regulate their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, as well as for understanding and managing others. So the idea and understanding that much of classroom learning occurs through interactional and interpersonal processes. And so part of learning is not just teaching the academic content, but also teaching those cultural and social interpersonal skills and self-management skills. And then lastly, these are tried and true strategies when we're thinking about social and emotional learning. It's just that we're also more recently understanding that they can and should be applied to support children in newcomer families. And so those tried and true kind of buckets of social emotional competencies are social awareness of your kind of being able to read the room and understanding that social context, your relationship skills, being a responsible decision maker, self-management, and self-awareness. This is another framework for how you can teach SEL. It's by building strong relationships with students. You can use those relationships to then teach interpersonal skills. You can explicitly instruct in social emotional skills. You can thoughtfully model social emotional skills. You can provide many practice opportunities. Teachable moments are key. So essentially, the way I say it is whenever a student behaves in a way that is not conducive or productive to the school or classroom environment, that's either a moment to provide consequences, or it's a moment to teach how they could behave or interact or engage differently. So every moment that's a discipline problem is also a teaching moment. And also creating conducive environments. And so thinking about children in newcomer families. So one of the pieces is this clear is that even when the faculty and staff in the school don't reflect the identities and immigration backgrounds and cultural histories of the students, there's still many things that you can do to create and reinforce a sense of cultural belonging. And this is a moment in time when kids in newcomer families are getting many messages that they're not wanted here, and that this is not a place where they can experience and find belonging. And so that creates a tremendous amount of stress, trauma, and dysregulation. And creating a school and a classroom where they can actively see and experience cultural belonging is a key piece of social emotional learning. And providing a few examples here. Again, these are not exhaustive, this is just a few. So thinking of ourselves as educators, do we view newcomer children and their histories and their cultures as deficits or assets? It all begins, first of all, with how we see and understand the cultural differences, and in this case, cultural assets that kids in newcomer families bring with them into school. Do we find ways for our students to share their stories with their peers and school staff? Or do they feel that their stories are irrelevant and different and tangential, and not the ones to be shared in school? Do we encourage them to linguistically switch when appropriate to establish connection and facilitate understanding? Do we encourage, when we see an experience and engage with an English language learner struggle to say something in English, do we encourage them to say, oh, say it in Spanish or say it in your language and then say it in English? Or do we so strongly enforce English only that we are not helping them in developing their cognitive and thinking skills? So there are times to encourage and creating comfort in linguistic switching. And lastly, are students encouraged to consider issues in ways that bring their cultural background into the classroom? So when we are developing the content of the materials that we're teaching, do we make space in that content for kids to share how this may look different in your home or from your cultural experiences, and encourage and create moments for them to bring that into the classroom? These are some of the ways where social emotional learning can be applied to thinking about creating cultural belonging for kids in newcomer families. And with that, I'm actually, because Diane had asked me to share this again, I'm going to share this. This is my last thing. It is impossible for a dysregulated adult to regulate a dysregulated child. And so anything and everything that I've said before this, adult self-regulation is everything when we're thinking about supporting the mental health and behavioral regulation of others and of young people. And this is, I use the term reactive versus responsive, and saying that educators are reactive when their actions are determined by emotions that were triggered by a student's behavior. So all kids, all students are going to do things that will at time create an emotional reaction in us, and that's okay. But when we react based on that emotion that is triggered in us, we are often much more intense and punitive than is warranted by the immediate situation, because there's the situation plus our emotional reaction. When we are responsive, it's when we experience that emotion for something, when a student does something, but then what kicks in is our knowledge about trauma in ways that enables us to separate our triggered emotions from the developmentally supportive response. So we're always thinking about what is the developmentally supportive response to improve the student's ability to behaviorally regulate the next time. So when we are responsive to behavioral challenges, The focus is on utilizing pedagogical practices that help students build their coping and self-regulation skills. And one of the ways that we can do that is inserting a 1 to 3 breath pause between being triggered and responding in either what we say or what we do. And then that's the end. So I think Derek's coming back on, but we are turning it over. Oh, there's Melissa. We're turning it over to some of our educators and folks working in schools now.
Thanks, Micere. That was incredible. I had my ideas and then I was taking so many notes on what you had said in your presentation that were so applicable. So thank you. That was really wonderful. I really appreciate being here. So I'm Melissa Hughes and I've been teaching for a very long time. And so I am here to talk about, in response to some of this knowledge that was just shared and my experience as a CPS teacher in the classroom. I will take us back to why I first became interested in learning more about being trauma informed and responding to my students' mental health needs. So I taught in Inglewood at Team Inglewood High School, which is now closed. But when I was there, we had a great community. It was a small school. But my students were experiencing complex trauma and systematic trauma, right? So young people who live in neighborhoods that are hyper segregated, which leads to a lack of access to resources, which means that mom might be driving farther to get a job, to work at a job that is maybe paying minimum wage, right? You have parents who are working poor. All of these things impact their mental health and their well-being. And when you're in neighborhoods where there's increased violence because of a lack of these access to these resources, to the systematic, oppression policies, these layer down on young people, and that shows up in the classroom. And so I was really searching. I knew students' behavior was dysregulated, but at the time I didn't have like the language or the understanding of how to support young people, like really support them. And then in 2007, one of our students was killed in the middle of the year. He was a senior, and it devastated our community. It devastated the staff and the students. And what we did not know then, which is another reason I'm so appreciative that Micere talked about this at the end, is the expectation was to kind of push our trauma, our grief down and to keep it moving. And that was not helpful for our students. And for a lot of reasons around that grief. And so I started to push back on that, where we did talk about grief. In the intro, we talked about how I was a co-founder of a poetry team. Poetry became a really big part of our culture at the school. Students used it to make meaning of the complex traumas they were experiencing. They used it to build with other young people across the city, within the school, as a place where they could, tell their story, because so many times their story is being told for them, right? What does it mean to be a young Black person in the city who's living in Inglewood, who's living in Austin? Those narratives are being filled in for those young people. So really wanted to work on providing space and opportunity for young people to be able to tell their story how they wanted to tell it. Also a learning that occurred, and I think we'll talk more about this later also, was that as young people trust you and build relationships with you, and especially like new teachers, they love their new young teachers, right? But sometimes those boundaries get crossed. And when you're new and you're younger and you're trying to figure out how to help or support your young people, what ends up happening sometimes is we try to fix things, and that is not our role. We try to we take this almost like therapeutic approach. That is also not our role. Lizette will talk more about this. We need to figure out how we can be supportive of young people as teachers and stay in that teacher lane. I think that that includes things like it's really important around your boundaries, right? That's really important. Other things that I was able to do as a teacher outside of my classroom is, it actually started in my classroom. I started like a little corner that was, I called it the check yourself before you wreck yourself corner. So if you were feeling frustrated, a kid had an option to go sit in the corner, right? I think those spaces are pretty normed now. I don't know if they are in high school spaces, but definitely in elementary. And then what we did is we advocated for restorative justice practices in my school. And so what that meant, that punitive piece was happening less. Instead of kids being pushed out or suspended, we started doing talking circles. I built a peace room at Inglewood where we went where conflict was addressed, right? If there was a fight or if there was about to be a fight, we gave young people tools and space to really talk through those and process through those with their peers. In addition to, making those referrals to the school counselor or to those other partners. So it was really important for me to understand what it meant to be supportive, but also realize that like I had to be very clear about what my role was in supporting young people and their mental health challenges. Unfortunately, young people self-medicate, right? My students do a lot of self-medicating. I've lost 2 students to overdoses in the past 3 years. They took something with fentanyl and they didn't know it. So I'm a teacher who I carry Narcan with me, which is something I would never think of. And I've shared that with my students. We have these conversations about the choices they're making to cope and the ones that are harming them and the ones, that are maybe healthy and not healthy. And so it's tough, right? It's tough, but it's also this gift that young people are open to talking about these things with us, about their mental health challenges. They have language now in ways that they didn't in 2007 when I started. And a lot of my students are really open to that referral to the counselor or to the partner. And so it's also having these conversations with parents. My school does a really good job of partnering and partnering with parents about why it's okay that the young people are getting this little extra support from a counselor at school or beyond. We are attempting, cell phones are really tricky. It's really tricky. So one thing that I've done is we've done podcasts, let's dig into what's social media really doing to you, right? How is it addressing like your worldview and how you see yourself? Another thing that, is challenging for young people is like how social media might make them feel isolated. So we are really intentional about how are we building relationships with young people? In our school, we look for students who potentially might be flying underneath the radar, right? They're the C student, they're kind of quiet. What are we noticing about them? Who's connected with them in the building? What adult is connected? And if no one says, oh, I'm that adult, I'm connected, we make sure that that young person has an adult partner. Another thing that we do is be intentional about curriculum. So, I did a unit on superheroes and origin stories because trauma is often a part of a superhero's origin story. And so young people were able to create their own superhero version of themselves. They wrote about that origin story, and that could either be their superhero's origin story or their own origin story. So this important of normalizing talking about mental health, providing students those structures and boundaries became really important for my classroom practices, and relying on the people who know more than I do about how to support a young person who is experiencing those mental health crises, right? Or the complex trauma, which, my students in Austin, they are experiencing that. As a school, we've experienced that communal trauma a few times throughout the past 4 years since COVID. And so how are we responding as teachers in that building? We are checking in on each other, on our own well-being and mental health. I've been a dysregulated adult who, should not have been dealing with students. And I was like, hey, I need to step back. I need to apologize later on, or we need to work through this in a circle, things of that nature. And I just want to wrap up with one last thing that is important, I think, that I have found with other professionals or other resources. So like Sean Ginwright does this approach called healing-centered engagement, which feels really important for practitioners who are not clinicians. And I think I can share that in the chat, hopefully, as we move through this next section. And the last thing I want to talk about is that a lot of probably you in the audience are also white educators, and it is critically important that we address the system-induced trauma, our own whiteness, our own biases, when we go into the classroom. Those pieces are critical if we want to truly support young people's mental health and well-being and be healing centered or trauma informed. So I am going to pass it along to Lizette, who's going to talk more from that therapeutic counselor partnering perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Melissa. So hello, everyone. I'm Lizette Flores. I'm the school counselor at Grissom Elementary. So some of the challenges that a lot of our students have been facing, and I know I've talked to a lot of counselors within the CPS district. I actually have a really, I think especially as a counselor, oftentimes you may be the only counselor in a building. I know I'm the only counselor, so networking or getting to know other counselors in the district is very important because we don't do this work on our own. So some of the things that we've seen with our students, one of the major ones and most immediate ones, just everything that's happening right now in our city with ICE. I know I work on the southeast side of Chicago. The east side neighborhood was hit really hard last week. So there's just a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety that we've been seeing with our students, also with their families, that has impacted students' even ability to be able to concentrate or to even prioritize school right now, because a lot of them are in fear of maybe their family not being at home once they leave school. I know a lot of schools have been doing a lot to kind of create kind of safe passages to get to and from school, because there's a lot of families who have not left their home since all of this started. I know in a lot of the neighboring schools, like we've had families who have not left. So a lot of the schools are being very supportive, even having groups that go out and pass out groceries or even setting up food drives to support those families. I know attendance has been impacted with that. So our attendance has been really down. I know in the day after everything happened with the standoff with ICE on the East Side neighborhood that was all over the news, all of the schools in the area had over 100 absences. And I checked in with all the counselors. They're like, we have over 150 students out. So it's really impacting attendance, increase in anxiety. So we've already had students who deal with a lot of anxiety as is, but with everything happening in the city, that's been escalated. A lot of times they also mirror the anxieties that they see at home. Depressive symptoms, there's always been, and the thing is that when it comes to anxiety and depression, these are a lot of internalizing behaviors. So we may not see everything, or we may think like, oh, they still talk to their friends or they're still engaged in extracurricular. And a lot of times families think that everything is good because these are all things that they're feeling inside. So they're internalizing behaviors that we don't oftentimes see unless we actually have a conversation with the kids, or start to notice other changes like a decrease in their so for example, like all of a sudden their academic performance is declining, or they're not as involved with things that they used to be involved. They're a little bit withdrawn with their friends. But these are things that you often don't always see because they're more internalizing behaviors. A lot of students who have just low self-esteem, and this is like, it goes as young as like first graders who talk very negative about themselves, a lot of negative self-talk. Also like with trauma, the community violence, I know, students are impacted by trauma, like by the violence that happens in their community. I know, just last week, one of the schools on the southeast side, like one of their students was shot. And then you had another shooting that happened where it was like the older siblings of others. So it's like there's always the impact that happens in school with the community violence. I know at my previous school, we had lots of students who had siblings or even parents who were killed by the community violence. And then I can speak that on my own because my son, I have a 17-year-old son, and when he was 8, his dad was also killed by the community violence in the city. So, these are traumas, like when it comes to grief and loss, like these are things that students, grief doesn't have a timeline. And I think that's really important to always remember that there can be a child who's lost a parent 2, 3 years ago, but to that child, like it feels like it happened just yesterday. But community violence is a big one. Just students who are dealing just with loss and grief overall. Students who have, just if it's a regular loss, or even if it's like separation or divorce, that's really hard. Even pet loss, like you have sometimes students who lose a pet, and then that's something that they're dealing with. Also like the substance abuse. So we've been seeing an increase in vaping, as well as just like exposure to substance abuse at home. Then you have a lot of the more interpersonal trauma that they may experience in the household, having a hard time being able to self-regulate. And we see this often, just a lot of lack of self-awareness, even social awareness, like how do I talk to my friend? A lot of times now we're living in a very social media or a cyber world where oftentimes students communicate, but they always do it through some type of social media platform where they're texting, but really having that face-to-face engagement, or even the social skills to be able to have a conversation and communicate has been a challenge. And I know like in school, like with teachers, like even having the students be able to turn and talk with a partner, or to have like that student discourse has been challenging because we've had to teach them how to talk to one another, which was something that I feel has been lost. Like it was impacted by COVID, but now because we live in this world where everything is done like online or behind the screen, we're losing those social skills. Also a lot of learned helplessness, and then also students having a really hard time persisting through challenges is something that I know I've seen in the classroom, where there's lack of engagement sometimes, lack of motivation, and then also like something is challenging and they don't want to, they kind of want to give up and they don't want to persist. There's a lot more things. I know a lot of the counselors that I work with very closely. It's like you know, in a lot of schools, you have one counselor, maybe a social worker. You might have a social worker there every day, but there's a lot of things that our students are dealing with. And, you know, I agree with the presentation earlier that oftentimes, you know, a student may present with these symptoms, and then there's a call home and the parent doesn't really understand. They're like, "But wait a minute, they look fine, they seem fine," but it's again, it's like a lot of these internalizing behaviors, where it's like students don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. But those are just some of the challenges that, you know, counselors in the district, that I've seen in my school. But I'm gonna go ahead because I know we're a little bit, I have more to talk about. We'll talk about kind of the plan of what we can do when we come back around, afterwards. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to you, Dr. Keels, and I'll be back.
Thank you, thank you. I think this part of the program is about how to move forward and way forward from this point, given all the things that we talked about. So I wanted, what if the four of us come back together and let's all just have an open discussion about moving forward. So I think one of the first questions, if we can just be reflective, is how do we help students to move forward? We're talking about a lot of trauma, a lot of mental health considerations that we notice with our students. What can we as professionals do to help move them forward in life? What do you think? What are some thoughts? What does that look
And I'll
like?
just say, Melissa, you are unmuted, but not on camera, so we can't see you. And I think
Mm,
oh, she's blocked from starting her
okay.
camera. So I will say it is kind of what Lizette and Melissa talked about, is that it's a daily, it's a daily inch by inch. What are you doing, or what am I doing today that's just first and foremost recognizing and what's happening with the kids that, you know, that I'm experiencing with, that I'm talking with, that I'm working with. And one, for example, the issue, Lizette, that you brought up of absences. So the which you can think of when we're thinking about talking about trauma, is we think of what has changed in kids' behaviors. So when something, you know, kids that were attending before regularly and behaving in one way, suddenly there's a shift in behavior, there's lots of absences showing up, or there's lots of dysregulation, or whatever it might be. The fact is, I think both of you mentioned, they are not always going to tell you, like, hey, this is the traumatic thing that happened, or this is the emotionally distressing issue that I'm dealing with. Most of the times they're going to walk into school, walk into the classroom, trying to act as if everything's okay, until they can no longer act as if everything's okay. And then it's going to show up in their behaviors. And so just staying present, recognizing what you're feeling in yourself, so that you can be responsive, and just, yeah, that's that hard work of just showing up every day, being very present, and asking questions, being curious. You know, we say that, being curious about why are things looking differently? Why are things changing in the students' behaviors?
And I'll add, I know like in my school and from everything we know about, trauma, like the number one thing we need to ensure is to try to build a community of safety. And without safety, we really can't do anything else. So I know particularly like in my school, and I can speak to this, it's like safety is like my number one priority that I always tell students. It's like your parents drop you off, you're here for 7 hours. We need to make sure that school is a safe space where, if you do need support, like that, you have somewhere or someone to go to ask for help. So I think it really starts with first and foremost with the structures and the systems in the school to provide a safe environment for students as well as for staff and the families that come. So it's a whole community, like an environment of safety. And we do that in a lot of ways. So I know like in our school, it's like we have a climate and culture team that really works hard to make sure that these systems are in place so that students feel safe, students feel heard, but as well as staff where they feel like they're supported if they need it, because the reality is it's like as the staff, the adults that come in the building, it's like we come in, like I tell my kids, like we come in with an invisible backpack too, right? So it's like it's it's a whole like system that needs to be created of safety. I know I really stress with students and teachers, and I know you mentioned this earlier, the importance of building relationships. Relationships are the forefront of all the work that we do. Like as counselors, as clinicians, it's like everything we do is based off the relationship that we build with students. Like without relationship, it's like we really can't do any, or at least any good work, because we need buy-in from our students. Like our students need to feel that they're cared for. So I really stress building relationships, having a good environment, making school fun. So we do a lot of things to kind of help with engagement, to kind of boost up attendance. I know schools have behavioral health teams. So if there are students who, there's concerns, teachers are able to refer them. And then the behavioral health team is comprised of, myself, like school counselors, the school social workers, sometimes the case managers, the school psychologists. So it's a team of staff that really looks to see, okay, what's going on with this child? What are some interventions, or what are some tier 2 or 3 things that we can do? What supports can we put in place to help support this child? There's a lot of collaboration. So I know for myself, I collaborate a lot with the teachers, with the parents. I'm very active all over the place. So you'll see me, I'm like running all over. With community, I collaborate a lot with the counselors in the network in the district to kind of check in, because sometimes we need those check-ins as well. If we know that there is a student who is being impacted, it's like the initial check-in, and then also communicating to the family to let them know that we're here, not just for the child, but also for the family as support. I know with everything happening with ICE, like I've gone on home visits, and not as like your child is not in school, but more as in like we understand what's happening. What is it that you need so that we can work together and be a team? So and I know other schools have done it where they're actually walking kids to and from school so that they don't have to worry about, something happening if the parents are the ones who are dropping them off. So there are schools that actually have like walking school buses, or they have like different like safe passages where the staff is walking and kind of walking the kids, making sure that they're getting to school and from school safely. All CPS schools right now have sanctuary teams that are focusing strictly on the safety of the schools, with everything happening just in specific with like ICE. So I know in my school, um, I'm out during recess right now to kind of just be an extra set of eyes, or even like walking around at dismissal to be just being more present. And then we get communication if there's anything happening in the neighborhood. So there's like a lot of protocols that are in place just to ensure safety while the kids are in school. Small groups. I do a lot of SEL. I do a lot so the teachers do the tier 1 instruction. So we do second step at my school. But then in addition to that, like I like to push into the classrooms and I do extra SEL where I cover lots of topics and I do a lot of like awareness weeks. So like, for example, like I've done bullying prevention awareness for this month because it's bullying prevention awareness month. At the beginning of the year, I always go in and I do the meet the counselor lesson where I let kids know like, hey, you know, this is who I am. This is what my role is. This is how you can come and talk to me. This is my referral process for students. And then I also have Calm Corner. Every classroom in my building, like I've made them a Calm Corner like kit with lots of different worksheets, coloring books, crayons, different fidgets that they can use, as well as different coping skills that they can practice. And then when I do my intro to like the school counselor, like I've done a lesson on coping skills and how to appropriately use the Calm Corner. But I think like the most important thing is just building a school that feels safe for students and for staff and for parents, and then really building on those relationships. Because without it, it's like we really are not able to get any, like we kind of stop, like we have to make sure that we have those relationships with the students.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me summarize some of this before Melissa speaks. You talked about creating this environment that is safe for students and staff, and the sort of student-centered environment where they can feel heard, and building these relationships. You talked about collaborating with parents, teachers, and other counselors. Talked about doing check-ins and um, walking school buses and running groups with social emotional learning, bully prevention awareness, and tied all this together, which is helping to advance their sort of coping skills during this time. Thank you. Thank you. Melissa, please.
Sorry about that earlier. I was like, ah. So I think, you know, along with that relationship piece, really want to cement that is just crucial. And that means amongst staff, right? Like we need to rely on each other. We need to be able to be there for each other. And we need to be able to say like, hey, I can't do this right now. Does anyone have it for me? Can anyone come in? We lost a student I who had just graduated last year, and when I found out, I was able to immediately go to another teacher's room who I knew was going to be having a really hard time because our counselor was dealing with the basketball team, right? So I was able to step in that situation and provide her some support while she was grieving, while our students found out, right? And our students found out, this might seem like a bit of a distance, but because they have access to their cell phones. And so like I would encourage, I know we're teachers here, but I would encourage like when you're applying for schools or if you're at a school team, really address cell phones in your building. You know, there's so many reasons why they are not good for our young people to have, and that's just one of them. And so along with like the supporting of each other with staff, knowing what resources are available in the community for families, right? I had a student who was experiencing homelessness. He was staying with a friend for a while, and I found out it was because his mother she had been in like a 90-day treatment facility. I happened to call her right when she came out, and she was telling me that, you know, she was struggling finding a job and stable housing. Because of our relationship, my school's relationship with Build, which is across the street, I was able to connect her. And so they helped her with finding secure housing and some job leads, right? I can't fix that. That's not for me. I don't have those skills or resources, but I can connect her with someone who can. So as a school, we like come up with community resources, little sheets for our students. We have mental health awareness days, and just like a lot of modeling of wow, I am not, this right now is not the time for me to be able to handle this situation I'm in. So I'm going to tap out and I'm going to return to this tomorrow because I'm feeling frustrated or I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like a lot of discussion around regulating our own emotions and being really vocal and verbal about that. And then advocacy is the last thing I will say at the school level. So last year, we were really overwhelmed by the number, boys specifically, who were self-medicating. We knew that they were high. We knew that they were like taking pills. We knew it was beyond our capacity. So we really pushed for CPS to come, someone from their office to come talk to us about what we could do and then how to like expand our referral process for these boys. And when we dealt with some shootings and some deaths outside of our school, and our kids were impacted, and we lost 2 students, we also did not feel like CPS's response was enough. And we met with our union and proposed some ideas. Like, I don't know if I should be saying this, but I'm going to. Our principal got a phone call from downtown, like I think it was the 3rd day after one of our students died by suicide. And they asked why our attendance was like, what was going on with attendance, right? Or this happened after a shooting. And so not only were we pushing for this, what needs to happen at schools, but like the district can't be asking principals about attendance metrics, right? Principals can't be going in and doing a reach evaluation on teachers 2 days after one of the kids in their class was killed, right? What are we doing in the long term for our students when we're experiencing these traumatic events? And so we really push this advocacy, and some of that language, some of the things that we requested made it into this contract. And so that is also deeply important when you were feeling like a little out of control or overwhelmed. There are ways to address it at this larger level as well.
Thank you, thank you. And one of the things that you talked about was the sort of indirect or vicarious trauma that teachers may experience, and how we need to emotionally support each other and have a sense of empathy, genuineness, and unconditional regard for the way that we may suffer indirectly. We have students who are studying education and counseling. And I wonder, within the next 5 minutes, what would be some recommendations or a recommendation you may have for them, especially despite all the things that we talked about? There's always a glimpse of hope and a reason to continue. What can you offer future counselors and future teachers on the importance of education and counseling in the work that we do, please?
I can go really quickly. I would recommend, especially for teachers, to read Sean Genray. He does work around youth development and a lot of work around healing and radical healing. His work, Healing Centered Engagement, if you just look that up, he's got a really accessible article on it. And it gives non-clinicians some ideas on how to do this work when you're not a therapist, when you don't have the training. It talks about collective healing, which is something that we haven't had time to address, but it seems really deeply important. And tools that we can help young people develop to promote that healing, right? We're talking about like, it's this focus on the wellness we want, not what's wrong with the kid, quote unquote, not the trauma that's harming them, but like the healing we want to see, the wellness in them. And so I think it's really powerful for teachers to read this work and look at that approach.
Thank you, Melissa.
So I'll say, as a counselor to future counselors, I think the most important thing, because this is not an easy job. I think working in education can be very it can be very exhausting. I think, vicarious trauma, you tend to carry your students' stories. We're talking about a profession where it's like it's all built on relationship. So when things happen, it's like we carry everything with us. I think the first thing, number one, is just to really be self-aware and be aware of your own traumas, your own triggers, your own history. Self-awareness is everything. I always tell teachers and students, it's like nothing in this world is personal. Like it's not personal, right? We're always projecting or displacing things that we're feeling. So whenever we feel triggered, it's for a reason, and we kind of have to step back and kind of recognize, like why? Okay, why did I feel that way? Because it's always going to stem from something else. So really having that self-awareness. And then second thing is understanding that, we don't do this work alone. It's like we do it in community. So really, and for counselors especially, because oftentimes it's like, unless you work in a high school, at the elementary school level, like you're usually the only one. So really building on relationships with other counselors. And I know I was able to do that when I started in CPS, and that was actually how I joined the CTU counselors committee. And then I ended up, being part of that community. And then I co-chaired, met some really great, friends who I was able to network, and I've kind of expanded that. But it's like really building on that community of knowing who you can go to for support. Because otherwise this work is very hard. It's very like emotionally exhausting, but understanding that, that we have to have those boundaries and we can't pour out of an empty cup. So it's important to always network and even consult with other counselors or other clinicians. Like if you have a social worker in your building, making sure that you have a relationship to be able to kind of brainstorm or, have someone to collaborate with, because it can be it's a hard job. I think the role of, just the clinicians right now and everything that's happening it's very heavy. But there's also this is how I like to see it. Through pain comes strength, comes power, right? So turning in and this is where you see these glimmers of hope, right? Where you have all of these things happening in our city, but then you see the amazing things that are happening where you have community members kind of stepping in. I'll take your kids to school. Just let me know. They're organizing, they're sending out food. So they're getting groceries and sending them to different households. So you see all of these great things that come out of these very hard times. And I think, and I'm sorry for getting emotional, but it's the truth. These hard times show you the amazing things that we have in life, right? So you see all the love, all the support, teachers, other parents, it really brings people together. So I think the most important thing that I would tell other counselors or educators who are working in this field is to find your team, right? In school, whether it's at other schools, and really collaborate, and don't do this work alone, because there are so many people, amazing people, who are here and who want the same thing, which is, for our kids to survive, thrive, and succeed. It's like I tell my students all the time. I was like, my job is to make sure that you are ready for when you get to high school and beyond. And I want to see you come and visit me. But it's like the work that we do, it's not easy, but it is so nice when I get emails from students who have graduated. They're graduated and are in college. Oh, Miss Flores, just want to share with you, that is beautiful to see, to be able to see, you may not see the impact of your work right away, but later on, it's they'll come and share a story. You know what you said to me really helped me out. And I think it's those moments of knowing that, we're setting out like their little seeds, right, that we're planting. And then we see it later on. And I promise you, like, then you're like, okay, this is why I do what I do. But it's really about building community and understanding, that we don't do this work alone.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. And the power of our emotions is that we stand up when people are traumatized and we let them know that there's hope out there. And that's the beauty of the work we do. So just thank you for the insights about just making sure we take care of ourselves and being there for each other. Ms. Sherry, do you have anything, please?
I would really just echo what both Melissa and Lizette said, under the words that you can be that adult, because you could be the teacher, the lunchroom supervisor, the janitor, the counselor. You can be that person. They connected with you through school. So it's anybody in the school can be, any adult in school can be, has the possibility to be that person that the student remembers as the person that made a difference. So we all have that. If it wasn't for Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, I wouldn't be where I am today. So that's to me where it's just really echoing what they did, where the hope is that it's a place where you have the opportunity to control a little bit of that, your sphere of influence, and be that person for that student where they can tell that story. And then they will come back, or not, but they'll just hold it in their heart, that there was that person. If it wasn't for that person, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah. In counseling, we call those transitional objects in people's lives, people that we attach to and separate to find our identity. I want to just say thank you. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation, having this discussion with me. I know our students, staff, faculty, professionals in our field are very happy that you offer us a way forward. So I want to just say thank you before I give closing remarks. Thank you. Thank you so kindly. In closing, I would like to spend just a couple of minutes of your time to give some brief remarks about hope. Hope as a verb and a second story. It was John M. Winslat who wrote and said, when we think of hope as a verb, it makes the person the subject of that verb. And therefore, we can activate this notion of hope by stepping into this grammatical position of the subject in that sentence. And I'm not John, but he was amazing, and he is amazing narrative therapist, or his work in narrative therapy. And I think what he seems to be implying is that the person is who drives hope and also become the container of the hope. At least that's how I'm walking away with that when I read it. It is a way of understanding or conceptualizing hope that makes the person an active participant in their healing process instead of a passive recipient person who is moving towards a particular outcome in life. The second part about hope, then, is when we come to understand hope as a second story. It becomes a theme in a story that is augmented out of another story. And that story, which is the first story of trauma. I want to make sure I'm saying what I'm saying, because what I'm getting at is that while we have trauma in our society today, Hope is always there, and it's a story in a story. Sometimes trauma can make us into the single story. And this is where hope comes in. And where Michael White, who was one of the founders of narrative therapy, would say that hope is having the courage to stand up against the effects of trauma. And through hope, or this hope narrative, we can develop or help people to develop new language that has a different vocabulary, syntax, and meanings. And this can have a positive experience on that child's life and our collective survivance. I'm going to attempt to put these two things together right now. And I'm going to briefly end with some points without answering them for you, but something to walk away with. The hope as a verb in the second story. Hope as this theme in this story allows us to co-author this second story, and a story where we're no longer saturated with trauma. I get to describe it how I see it with my words. And when I describe it the way that I see it with my words, it starts to offer unique outcomes where I can start claiming or resurrecting my knowledge from all forms of oppression. And once when hope appeared to be a thin description, it gets thickened. And as the story thickens in its descriptions, it starts to provide us with what Michael White would say, a landscape of actions where I start talking about myself and what happened to me, and perhaps in a different way and language, and create a landscape of meaning by which, or identity, by which I take this landscape of identity and start to construct new meanings as I describe this new story of hope. And as I start to embrace this story of hope, and when I link them to other landscapes of life and find new outcomes in life, I extend my hope to a preferred self-narrative in the future. And I invite other people to witness the story of hope as I perform new knowledge, new practice, and start to create a better future. So therefore, to this end, and what Michael White would probably say if he was here today, never forget, always remember, because hope is a theme in a story that is comprised of events in a sequence across time and organized according to this new plot and theme we're developing in life. Thank you for joining us today and starting this new celebration away from the trauma and into the hope. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Good night, please.